Hey Ben, good morning. What do you see out of Purdue? What sort of challenges do they present with their offense and some of the things they do?
I mean, they're built, they've got the kind of perfect pieces. They're just built so well, and they're so well coached offensively. Obviously, their point guard, and then their bigs, and then they're shooting with, they space it with shooting. And so, you've got your primary playmaker, but a lot of it's designed through their plays, through their actions, and they've got a lot of them. And they kind of leverage those big guys, and then they're able to get threes off because of the leverage of those big guys, which makes it very difficult to defend.
Tom?
Ben, you're a guy that's been known to develop point guards in your career as a coach. What stands out to you about Braden Smith? And is there any kind of commonality that you see between him and Bennett?
No, two separate things. Obviously, Braden's really, really good, an elite winner. And obviously passer, all the things that people have mentioned before. I think the probably difference is the systems are different. I think theirs is a little bit more play heavy. I don't think their coaches probably get enough credit for how good they are at setting people up. Particularly their point guards and their fives. I mean, they're elite at getting those people in positions to be able to accumulate a few assists, accumulate some points. And then those guys are, great at being coachable and tough enough to be able to do those things. And so they're kind of the epitome of what it means to be a college basketball player and a college basketball program. But from a point guard perspective, yeah, polar, not polar opposites, but just a lot more different than it seems from the outside, just because of the style of play.
Tyler?
Ben, two of your four losses last season at Drake came in a row. Do you remember, like, after you guys lost back-to-back games last season, like how did you guys kind of pull yourself off the mat and get going back in the right direction?
Yeah, and I think I do recall. I'm trying to think of how we did, and why we lost. I think it was, who did we lose to? Oh yeah, we got upset at USC. I think the way we did it, I think first off, the matchups were a little bit tricky with those particular games. I think the second thing is anytime regardless of how many players I had at Drake and regardless of how many guys I had coming with us to Iowa, there's still a level of figuring out with your group how to win, close games. I think getting close is great because that shows that you have enough fight and you're good enough to be able to stay in those kind of games. But to win them is where you have to. And last year we used the term "death by a thousand paper cuts." You have to be the one that does all those little tiny tiny things, whether it's making a few layups here or there that we missed. Uh, some scouting report mistakes that are really simple stuff that just takes a little bit more effort, and that's how you win those games. And I think last year that was a similar case where it was like, hey, guys, okay, so if we did this, there's about 30 points right there. Let's just take half of those mistakes, take those away. Now you're down to 15, and you get an extra 15 points. That's a big deal, but that's what teams that have experience and have learned how to win those big games do, or they just have an elite amount of talent, which we've got talent. We're probably not like the elite talent. And so we need to make sure that we do all the little things.
Madison?
Hey, Coach, I wanted to ask about Isaiah and just his ability to come off the bench and bring out just this extra level of physicality, and just his ability to he seems like he's everywhere when he's on the court. I'm just curious, how have you kind of coached with that so that he's able to be the aggressor in those situations with also managing foul trouble against some of these bigger teams?
Yeah, he's more what, like, as we progress through this, build, that's what, like, we want our kids to look like. Not necessarily from a physical perspective, but from a emotional perspective. Like, we want that kind of fight and fire and willpower he exemplifies exactly what we're searching for in players. And we've got a few others that do it as well. Obviously, he's the shocking example of it. I think ultimately, if we're going to be at our best, if we're going to be able to win championships, we need guys that act exactly like him on the floor. How do I balance that stuff? A lot of the times the aggressive team gets the calls, to a certain level, and then we've learned a few things. I've just studied more and more of how it is called at this level, and I think we adjusted last game. I thought we did a great job staying, outside of Bennett, staying out of foul trouble last game. We're a little bit more vertical, showed our hands a little bit more often, but you still got to have some physicality on the ball, and I don't think we do a good job of that.
Ethan?
Coach, you mentioned leveraging all five players on the floor to help, teams not just key in on Bennett. Is that something you work on in practice, or is that simply like my players need to execute what we're telling them to do better than they did on Sunday?
Well, part of it is this, like, okay, so if you just look at Illinois and how they're built, so part of it isn't necessarily you put them in action, but you've got Merkovic, who's 6'8", probably 250. He can post, he can pass, he can shoot. And so it's really tricky to figure out what you're going to do on his ball screens, because if you switch, they can just go inside. If you don't switch, you put a coverage. Now he can pick and pop if you don't rotate to him. If you rotate to him, then you've got, you're in rotation. So you're leveraging, like they're leveraging that, and then you got a 7'2" guy that can step out and shoot. And then you've got, Kylan Boswell, who can get downhill. And then you've got Stojakovic, who can get downhill, and then you've got a shooter in Wagler. And so they're kind of leveraging those big guys because they're so versatile. They can leverage the other side of a ball screen. So there's two sides to it. There's the guy coming off of it, and then there's the guy that sets it. And if both of them are equally as strong of a weapon, now you have to make decisions. When you make decision, there creates indecision. When there's indecision, now you create rotation. When you create rotation, now you got problems. Have we worked on that? Yeah. Ultimately, who can we leverage the most on the other side of that? We're still trying to piece that together.
John?
I wanted to ask you a couple weeks ago, and I kind of noticed the last couple of games how you interact with the officials. How much of a getting to know process within the Big Ten with the officials, personalities, how they call games? How much has that been for you here in these first few conference games?
Not a ton. I mean, I think it's probably more from the outside perspective, just because, I think we got a lot of people cheering for us. And so naturally you want to find something that creates I don't know if it's excuse or explanation for whether we win or lose. And I think that's probably more the narrative than it is the reality of officiating. I do think, though, as you transition levels, you have to get used to certain officials and how they call the game, how they interact with you, and vice versa. They have to get used to me. And then on top of it, when you have some foul trouble, okay, why are we getting foul trouble? The same things that we did last year we're doing this year, but all of a sudden they're called. And so maybe this level is officiated slightly different than other levels. Whether it's wrong or right, you have to be able to adapt to that. And part of being good at something is understanding the rules and how you play to the rules of the game. And so naturally you're always going to adapt to that, but that's not a part of the story or the narrative of winning or losing.
Did you see some of those guys in the Valley last year
Not one.
as you run? Okay.
I saw a few. I saw one from the other day. I saw a couple in California that we had in the Valley. Not in the Valley, but more like the big time games that we had. That's it. But none. Honestly, I'm not sure that I had on the roster from last year in the Big Ten. I'm not sure that I had anyone. I didn't have a lot. If I did, I bet I had one or two. But for some reason, I think maybe the Valley's underneath the Big 12, so you just didn't have as many. But they're all the same. They're all good officials, and it's they're working with us and we're working with them, and it's all good.
Okay. Thanks.
Yep.
Tyler?
How's Tavion doing health wise? Has he been feeling better lately?
Yeah, much better. Yeah, he got a lot of liquid in his body after the game, and he's a little bit better yesterday. He'll be a little bit better the next day. And so, as a coach, though, you probably after that game, you're probably like, man, I wish you were sick. I don't actually wish that, but you know what I mean. So he's doing better.
Ethan,
I'm curious with the way you coach. You mentioned you coach on emotion and you can get a little feisty, a little fiery. What's the challenge in retaining a roster? Or you don't seem to have lost many guys to the transfer portal, especially in this era of player empowerment. What's allowed you to kind of have that harder coaching style and not lose players?
Yeah, I think a couple things. I think one, you don't just do that to everybody. You don't just have conversations like that. It's as you build a relationship and there's a trust level. It's important to make sure that you have some confrontation because there's a level of truth telling that occurs, and sometimes in a game situation, it's not always good to say very, very nicely, "Hey, Tyler, I really wish you'd guard somebody this game," because that's what I would tell Tyler if I was playing with him. Um, Sometimes it has to come out a little bit more aggressive simply to get the point across, and then we move on. And then sometimes, like, in the case of, I think somebody mentioned Cam the other day when we were talking back and forth, sometimes that kind of conversation is important to allow them the autonomy to say something back, as long as it's solution finding and not just making an excuse for yourself. So as I build relationships with those guys, then you're able to coach them a little bit harder. And I think they appreciate the fact that I'm always going to tell them the truth. I'm not going to run around and complain about them without telling them to their face. I think the other side of that is um, I do think that when you when you're able to coach, when you coddle somebody or when you tell them too much about what they want to hear, a lot of times it actually is more self-preservation than it is trying not to hurt their feelings because you're worried about how they feel about you. And so we want to make sure that our guys understand that we care about them first and foremost. And when we coach you, sometimes you're not going to like that and you're going to be mad at me for however long. But like that doesn't bother me as long as I'm making you better and my heart's in the right place. And I think our guys understand and value truth telling, and we recruit to that.
Tyler.
You had Tate started the second half against Illinois. What did you like about what he was doing that kind of prompted you to be comfortable with putting him in there?
I mean, he's a good player. I think he's just he plays with such confidence on the floor and such. He just thinks he belongs, and he does, and he thinks he should win every game, and he tries to. And he's a competitor and obviously a good player. And so, that's why he was in there. And I thought that group was going pretty good together. And so we just chose to go with that direction.